Next speaker for our session is Dr. Krishna Mohan Pallavi. Dr. Krishna Mohan is currently working as an associate professor at Biotechnology Department of IIT Roorkee. He completed his PhD from KIFR Mumbai and postdoctoral fellowship from Rutgers University and University of Texas Medical Branch, UTMB, Texas. His areas of expertise are structural biology, protein engineering, biomolecular interactions, glycoimmunology, and structure-based design of therapeutics and scaffolds. He has published more than 110 publications, including research articles, editorials, book chapters, and books, various reputed international journals. He authored the book named Protein Engineering Techniques and Ring Polymeric Nanoformers.
सर का वेट कर लेते हैं.
He is also a guest editor or editor board member and ad hoc reviewer for several international research journals. He won several awards and fellowships for his research work. Most prominent are Indian Scientist Award from Indian Science Congress Association, ISCA 2009, National Academy of Sciences India, that's NASI, in 2014, and Innovative Young Biotechnologies Award, IYBA, in 2013 by IBIS. Dr. Krishna Mohan is going to speak on targeting the chemokine-mediated leukocyte migration by exploiting the specific binding surface of chemokines. So I request Krishna Mohan to please follow.
So, Professor Jadhav, thank you for your kind introduction. I think all of you can hear me.
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, thank you, sir. So, I thank Professor Jadhav and Professor Deepak for inviting me to this presentation to give a lecture. Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So, thank you for inviting me to give an invited lecture in this international symposium. So, today I will present something related to the an interface of structural biology and drug design, starting from the concepts of evolution. The title of my talk is Targeting the Chemokine-Mediated Leukocyte Migration by Exploiting Specific Binding Surfaces of Chemokines. So I will tell you what is the origin of these, why we are looking into these specific binding surfaces, and how actually what initiated us to look into a very detailed view of both evolutionary point of view and structural point of view. So I will tell you the details in next couple of minutes. So our lab in Department of Biotechnology. So I joined here in 2013. I am working here almost for 7.5 years. So we work essentially on our main focus is like I am trained as a biophysical chemist and a structural biologist. So we work on two systems of the proteins. Essentially, either they are glycoproteins, that means they are bind to the proteoglycan or glycosaminoglycan binding proteins, or the peptidoglycan degrading enzymes. So these are called the endolysins, which we work which are manufactured or which are prepared by the bacteriophages in order to kill the bacteria. So the other ones are the proteoglycan or the glycosaminoglycan binding proteins, there are several of those since growth factors, cytokines and everything. So we are interested in the chemokines and interleukins. So the application point of view, we are looking some of these glycosaminoglycans such as heparin, chondroitin and so on. So to prepare some of the nanofibers and everything, where maybe at later stage in the next couple of years or something, we can incorporate some of those, embed some of these chemokines into those for tissue regeneration applications and something. And for insights into how these proteins work or some of these small compounds work, so our group is very specialized in something called metabolomic profiling. So we do NMR based metabolic profiling. So a lot of you know, like sort of when you give a drug or something, so people do samples with either serum, urine or any of the biological fluids. So along with those, what we are interested is actually when you give a drug or something, what happens to the microbial side rather than from the serum side or the patient side. We want to see what is the mechanism of such drugs on the microbe, how they are killing, what pathways they are targeting or something. So we do these NMR based metabolomics also. So for today's talk, considering the audience, I wanted to present something which are the proteoglycan or the glycosaminoglycan binding proteins, which are the chemokines. So I will go step by step since our group works essentially with NMR spectroscopy and other biophysical tools. Let me introduce what chemokines are. Chemokines are small regulatory proteins which are actually involved in the first line of defense. So we have around 50 chemokines in our body. So they are broadly divided or classified into 4 different categories. One is CC chemokines, C chemokines, CC chemokines, CXC chemokines, and CX3. Essentially, the classification comes from the positioning of the cysteine groups under disulfide bonds. So if they have one disulfide bond, 2 disulfide bond without any intervening residue, there are 2 disulfide bonds with an intervening residue, and there are 2 disulfide bonds with 3 intervening residues. So they are classified into 4 groups, and the major groups are CC chemokines and CXC chemokines. So these 2 groups essentially comprises of almost around 40 to 45 chemokines out of the 50 chemokines. So CC is the largest one. So what they do, they essentially are the ligands for G protein coupled receptors. So they bind to the G protein coupled receptors. So since we are taking the structural biology point of view, so this is the canonical structure of a chemokine. As I told, there are 4 different subgroups of chemokines. Irrespective of what subgroup, it doesn't matter. It has a canonical monomeric structure. So there are 3 beta sheets which are antiparallel beta sheets. There is a alpha helix and there will be disulfide bonds formed. So there is always a long N-terminal loop which is the binding site or the activation site of G protein coupled receptors. So as I told, if you see, these are the CXC chemokines, these are the CC chemokines, irrespective of what group you are looking at. There are so many structures solved for all these chemokines, but the monomeric structures are essentially the same. Very little differences you find. So then where is the regulatory mechanisms coming with the chemokines? Essentially, the regulatory mechanisms comes with something called the oligomerization of chemokines. So as we have several of these chemokines, we have several of the chemokine receptors also. If you take the R1, R2, all these are G protein coupled receptors. So we have all these receptors present in our body, in CCR4, CCR5 and everything. So CCR3, which essentially is like one of the major targets for the AIDS and everything, since CCL5 is involved in it. So for all these receptors, you see there are multiple ligands. So there is a redundancy and a promiscuous relationship is present among the chemokine system and its receptors. So what is the importance of this? So lot of times I will tell you, if you see the CXCR2 receptor, there are 7 ligands which are binding to it. So what is the importance? Sometimes what happens is people have neglected. Suppose if you take CXCL1, 2, 3, there are 3 ligands. People said, oh, these are more or less same as like structurally, and also these are forming through gene duplication events or something. So they are almost same. So it doesn't matter. There is a redundancy. But now the question is it really true? Is that redundancy? Can't we specifically target one of the chemokines? That means if you do something, is it going to all the chemokines? So do we think that nature proposes such a redundancy that there is no specificity for a given chemokine ligand or something? So these are the some of the important features and interactions of these chemokines. So essentially I am showing here the monomer. So now depending upon how the two monomers interacts. So if you see in the case of AB monomer, the 2 beta 1 sheets form a antiparallel beta sheet of the intermolecular, which forms a CXC type of chemokine. They form to end-to-end dimer to form a CC type of chemokine, and in fact the chemokines can use both these surfaces and they can form tetramers also. So that is where the regulatory part comes. the monomers are also functional. They do leukocyte trafficking. The dimers of AB type do leukocyte trafficking, whereas AC type inhibit the leukocyte trafficking. So, but still the dimerization is important and oligomerization is important. The reason being, so if you see, not only it binds to G protein coupled receptors, they also bind something called glycosaminoglycans. So glycosaminoglycans are basically the charged linear polysaccharide molecules where they are decorated with sulfates. So the best examples we are having is heparin, heparan sulfate, chondroitin sulfate and everything, which a lot of them we see in the extracellular matrix. So these are the glycosaminoglycans. So these are the linear polypeptide chains, and they actually are decorated as on a core protein. If you see on a core protein, they are decorated on the core protein. Now what happens is, so why these glycosaminoglycans are important, or how the G protein coupled receptors, chemokines and glycosaminoglycans interact. Since these are the three molecular partners which we have to understand if we want to disrupt the interactions between the chemokines towards the receptors or glycosaminoglycans. So this is the picture what we are having roughly. Suppose if you have a bacterial infection or an inflammation present, so what happens is the cellular macrophages releases chemokines. So these cellular macrophages, when they release chemokines, they come towards the endothelial cell surface, and on the endothelial cell surface you have the proteoglycans where you have a protein core and these glycosaminoglycans. Now these glycosaminoglycans binds to the chemokines. If not, what happens on this side, actually you are having a blood flow. So whatever the chemokines comes here, due to the sheer flow of the blood, the chemokines will be washed away. So the GAGs binds the chemokines, and now they maintain a gradient of chemokines. So during this gradient, depending upon the number of GAG chains and depending upon the chemokine concentration, they can form monomers, they can form dimers and tetramers, which indeed can change the gradient of these things. So now depending upon the gradient, the leukocytes which are present in the blood will come, they will roll, they identify the chemokines. Now the G protein coupled receptors which are present on the cell surface, here they bind to the chemokines, then the G protein coupled receptor pathway initiates, then they go into the site of infection and they clear. So this is the biology behind it, but what we are seeing is these chemokines do interact with G protein coupled receptors, with GAGs, and they do also interact with among themselves. So the three main properties of biological significance of the chemokines are, one is oligomerization, one is the binding of receptors and the binding of the glycosaminoglycans. So there are several experiments which showed even in the mutant proteins in the murine and everything, which showed that now there is a differential behavior since the GAGs in the peritoneum is different from that of the lung or something. So essentially these GAG binding residues can indeed influence or regulate the leukocyte migration pathway. So depending upon the affinity. So what we are looking at, so as I told, there is a promiscuous relationship between these. So are these chemokines, the questions are very simple, are these chemokines really redundant? When you solve the structures, since the tertiary structure of a monomeric chemokine looks very similar, does that mean that there is no significance of each and every chemokine? And next, the thing is, if they are not redundant, do they really possess any specific binding surfaces which one can target? And now the other thing is, since the chemokines do oligomerize, does the oligomerized potency of all these chemokines are same or not? Or whether they form only homo-oligomers or they can even form hetero-oligomers. Since they have similar structural fold, as per the theoretical thing, they should form a heterodimers. But if they form heterodimers, how specific these heterodimers are going to be? So these are the things which we are going to ask, and these are the questions which I am going to address maybe in the next 30 minutes of my talk or something. What is the importance of gene duplication in the promiscuity and functional relationship of these chemokine ligands. So in this process, we also have tested some of the small molecule ligands to target the surfaces of these chemokines. So here I wish to say something like whatever the for a leukocyte trafficking or something, as of now, there is no such small molecule to target the chemokine ligand. Since actually what has been understood and what has been thought of is chemokine molecules are not something which should be targeted, and it should be only G protein coupled receptors. That is the reason we have the small molecule inhibitors for G protein coupled receptors, but not the chemokine. But now the thing is, there is a positive thing and there is a negative thing. If you block one of the G protein coupled receptors like CXCR2, that means you don't have to target all the 7 ligands. All the 7 chemokines which bonds cannot do any of the function. The reason being its target G protein coupled receptor is targeted. Whereas the negative thing is, if you want any specific function from any of the 7 ligands, since you targeted the G protein coupled receptor, even though it is an essential function, it may not carry out. So there are both the things which are present. So I will show these 3 features, maybe how the GAG binding happens, whether they do exist a homo and hetero oligomerization, and are they have, first important thing is, do chemokines have any surface specific recognition? Is it there? Then only like we can think of targeting the drug molecules, and we can think of screening large small molecule inhibitors and everything. But as of such, there are no studies to say they can bind small molecules. So in this talk, I will convince that the chemokines do have the binding sites where one can target with small molecules. So of course, we started with a evolutionary approach. We have taken, let me tell you, 3 chemokines: CXCL1, CXCL2, CXCL3. From almost all the species, we have taken maybe more than hundreds of sequences to know how conserve these evolutionary. So this is what is important. So I will tell you, I don't go through much details of the evolutionary part, since this is not the platform where we can discuss the evolutionary part much. So essentially the conclusions are very simple. So there are orthologs and paralogs. So there is a species specific gene duplication events happen across very species. So as a result, what happens is, in some of these like rodents or primates, what you will see is the paralogs will be far away to the top orthologs, whereas in the Laurasians or something, you will have the orthologs. That means in case of, suppose if you see this green clade where you have human, chimpanzee, orangutan, gibbon and everything, you are seeing all the CXCL1s coming one side, CXCL2 coming, CXCL3. That means here the orthologs are closer than the paralogs. Okay, whereas if you see here in the Laurasian, you won't see like that. You will see all the horse, CXCL1, CXCL2, CXCL3 coming one side, then rhinoceros, then walrus. That means the paralogs are very closely related. So that means there is a species specific evolutionary pattern happened before the gene duplication events. And all these 3 genes are formed due to gene duplication. So what we want to understand next is, when the gene duplication happens, so we all know any of these evolutionary events do happen for certain phenomena. Either they have to enhance the structural features, which is not the case in the case of chemokines. They have the same structure. So they have to enhance the stability of the molecule, one thing. So which also doesn't look like, since the tertiary structures are more or like similar, or they have to change the functional significance of this. So what we observed is, so these red lines actually suggest the residues which are positively selected from all these species. So these positively selected sites, which when analyzed, they say that majority of them are again within our hypothesis. They are either in the these residues in the N terminal, or essentially the receptor binding site. These three are in the dimer interface, and these last residues are present in the GAG binding. So the core of the protein, whatever is present in the middle beta sheet, the core of the protein is intact. That means the structure remained unchanged. It's there is no positive bias for that, and the stability remains the same, so that the core is preserved. And now what it does is it makes lot of single nucleotide polymorphisms in order to make sure, like that of with much ease, they can change the functionality of the protein. That means it don't change the GAG binding into something else. It can improve the affinity of the binding, and as a result, what happens we will see. So as a result, this is what happens. I told there are positive selection. So I will tell you, M represents the mouse, S represents the horse, and H represents the human. So if you see mouse, horse and human, you see the mouse, actually the helix which you are seeing, one call it as a primordial surface. So this is the way actually GAG binds. This is the blue patch which represents the electrostatically the positive surface, where GAGs have the sulfate molecules which are the negatively charged, so they bind here in a perpendicular direction, right? Now, if you see the beta sheet surface, in all the murine cases, there is no as such a charged surface. Okay, but whereas if you go to the CXCL3 in the horse, there is an enhanced positive surface on the beta sheet also. So now, if you go to human, the GAGs can bind in a multiple way. So you have the surfaces on the helical side, and you have the surfaces on the beta sheet. That means from the primordial surface, these positive selection of these residues made the chemokines, when it goes to the upper primates like humans or chimpanzees or something, there is multiple binding sites. As a result, there is much more complicated regulatory pathways for binding. So in fact, this we have shown experimentally using a NMR. What essentially you have to understand here is, wherever I have the boxes, so these two boxes actually represents the beta sheet site. If you take the murine CXCL1, you see the here on the C terminal and on the 20, around residue 20, these two are common in human and mouse. But whereas if you see these solid boxes, so the residues which are above the threshold is only significant in the human, not in the murine. So these significant values experimentally proves that these human chemokines have multiple GAG binding surfaces compared to that of the murine, primitive and primordial surfaces. So this is the first evidence which we have collected to understand that indeed these chemokines are not redundant. Although CXCL1, 2, 3 are gene duplicated, these are not redundant chemokines, and we do see the surface changes. So that is what I am showing. So the rectangle essentially represents this one, the second surface, whereas this is not present in the urine case. So now with this we move ahead. What we did is like sort of these surfaces are forming. Let's see how these surfaces are forming. What are the experiments we can do to understand the oligomerization properties. So this is what I don't go into the details. This is what a typical NMR spectra look like. What you can understand is, if you have a 100 amino acid polypeptide chain, in a simple layman terms, what you can understand is, if you have a 100 amino acid polypeptide chain, you have 100 amino acids. So this rectangular XY map should represent 100 dots. Each dot represents a amino acid. Okay. So now, suppose a CXCL1 chemokine have 70 amino acids. Now what I am seeing here is more than 70 amino acids, like 140 amino acids. That means for 70 amino acid polypeptide chain, you can't have 140 residues. So what we have is, the more the number of amino acids here, that means there are multiple conformations. So this is the first indication that says CXCL1 has both monomers and dimers. So I will show here, suppose if you take one residue alanine 43, it present in monomer and dimer conformation, L30 monomer and dimer conformation. Now we are talking about the GAGs. glycosaminoglycan. So what you do is you titrate with an octasaccharide of heparin. What you are seeing, every two peaks are merging into a one peak. That means the GAGs essentially induces dimerization. This is what, if you remember when I am showing the cartoon of the leukocyte trafficking, that is what I told. GAGs are essentially used to maintain the gradient of chemokines. How do you maintain differential gradient? The only way of maintaining a differential gradient of chemokines is differential oligomerization features. So you have the monomer, you have the dimer, but the moment you add GAG, the monomer species disappears and it forms a dimeric species. So that means it induces the dimerization. So of course we went ahead and we solved we made a disulfide dimeric structure, and we solved, here you can see now instead of two peaks, you will end up in one peak, since we link both the monomers into dimer. So there are no monomers and dimers, they are essentially trapped dimers. So as a result, you will see only one conformation, and now what you see is you add the GAG into it. So you solve the structure of this GAG bound protein. Now you can see here that these are the GAG binding amino acids and this is the GAG which is present in it. So the GAG sits perpendicularly on the top of the helix and it prevents these two helices move away from each other. It prevents the helices move away from each other so that it stops the monomer dimer equilibrium and it stabilizes the dimer conformation. So we have a lot of evidence for this. The moment you add dimer, you see we can measure in terms of, this is one of the beauty of NMR spectroscopy, we can measure in terms of delta Gs for each and every amino acid. So if you see the each and every amino acid delta Gs, what you are seeing is like now in the case of the dimer, the moment you add GAG, the residue-wise stability increases. That is obvious, like sort of, since these two monomers are moving apart from each other, you are pinning it by using a GAG. As a result, the stability of the whole molecule enhances a lot. So this is how the mechanism of a GAG glycosaminoglycan can induce dimerization and enhances the stability of the molecule. So with these surfaces, what we have done is this HEP6 is the natural GAG. So we are successful with some other GAGs. These are actually HA6, NHA6 and NC6. These are some of the synthetic GAGs which we prepared with collaboration from Germany, University of Berlin. What we have done is we have made these synthetic GAGs. You see now the GAG monomer dimer going to dimer. So we are successful with one of the synthetic GAG, which is the NHA6 or SHA6. So again, it is also converting the monomer dimer population into the dimeric species. That means for the endogenous GAGs, right now we have a synthetic GAG which can mimic the chemokine conformation as the endogenous GAGs do things. So now the other phenomena is, as I told, they do form homooligomers. If you see CXCL1, it's monomers dimers, whereas CXCL2 is entirely dimer. So that means CXCL2 is having a strong dimerization capacity compared to that of CXCL1. So that itself tells these dimers do differentiate. All the chemokines doesn't have the same dimerization. Now the question is, from the starting we are telling all these 1, 2, 3 are coming from the gene duplication. Do they? Experimentally we proved that there are heterodimers. So now this is a very simple and powerful experiment. Now you see when you have the CXCL1, what you see is two peaks which are monomer and dimer. Okay. Now when you add another thing which is CXCL2, if it remains as a homodimer, then you essentially has to see only two peaks. You shouldn't see three peaks. But when it forms a heterodimer, the dimer peak splits into two in order to form the heterodimer. So you can see for all these residues, there is an extra red peak coming, which is the heterodimeric peak. So this is the first evidence which we got that these chemokines do form heterodimers also. And we have in fact quantitated the heterodimers, how much percentage. So actually what it does is, in the presence of heterodimers, since heterodimer affinities are good enough, so what it does is, it depletes the monomer population. You can see in the A43M, the intensity drastically changes. It depletes the monomer population and it distributes between the homodimeric and heterodimeric populations. So there is a functional significance of this. The reason being, now if you see the top line, CXL1, CXL2, CXL3, these are the homodimers. Now you can make heterodimers also. The moment you make heterodimers, you have more number of regulatory states. The reason being, if you see the CXL1 is a tight binder. The moment you make a heterodimer, instead of this K22 here, what happens is you end up in putting a negative charge. So the affinity of the homodimer and the heterodimer do changes. As a result, the regulation of GAG oligomerization do changes for a heterodimer compared to that of a homodimer. So we went ahead and we compared the structural features of again CXCl3 also along with 2. They have the same structural features. Now the interesting part comes. I will give you this example like how fine tuning that nature has done to produce these chemokines. They are not at all redundant. The nature has done a very fine tuning in order to make these chemokines non-redundant chemokines. So see, if you see this, any structural biologist you go and ask these two things, they say, oh, you see the magenta and the green or something, well, they are exactly same. The contact map analysis is same. So there is no difference. But I will show you here one square, you see. Proline E, A, P, L, V, Q, K. Okay. So now, in the second sequence, if you see the L, which is the leucine, is replaced with arginine. And now, here there is a K lysine, which is replaced with isoleucine. So the rest of the sequence more or less same. Okay. This is glutamic acid, this is glutamic. We don't bother. Alanine, glycine. So out of the sequence, the nature design you see, there is a hydrophobic amino acid, there is a charged amino acid. There is a hydrophobic amino acid, there is a charged amino acid. Now, in one chemokine to the next chemokine parallel, these hydrophobic and charged amino acids, only L and K becomes R and I. So, there is a swapping of the hydrophobic amino acids and a charged amino acid. So, as a result, what happens is, in the case of CXCl3, the shifting of these R58 simply makes it as a small molecule binding pocket where it is not present in CXCl2. So it has done very fine changes so that we can use. So this is a naphthalene derivative which binds moderately tight. I don't say very tight or something, since we got around 20-30 micromolar or something for this, but still this is the first attempt to show that these are non-redundant proteins and they do have a very specific nature that one can target the chemokine ligands also for specific binding. So, and you don't have to do, the nature has done something while doing the gene duplication events and everything. Okay, so I will also show as another classical example of a traditional medicine where I can show that chemokines do have these binding surfaces. So this is called the bicillin. So bicillin is very well used as a immunomodulatory effect. It is used in cancer. It is used in arthritis. Lot of things. This is something used. Aroxylum indicum is something used very heavily in the traditional medicine of Ayurveda, and also it is used in Chinese traditional medicine. So this is a flavonoid. Bicillin is actually a flavonoid glycoside. So what literature suggests is, this is not our word, what literature suggests is, both the families of CC chemokines and CXC chemokines, in the presence of the bicillin, their interaction with the their protein, G protein coupled receptors will reduce. So that means essentially bicillin attenuates the binding or the G protein coupled signaling. So this has also been done and published that it halts the neutrophil recruitment to a certain extent when they have treated this bicillin with interleukin 8. So this is the evidence we have, and of course this is not a new evidence. If you see, this is there for last 15-20 years. But as I told, in the field no one has believed that even chemokines can have these binding surfaces. So we have taken this ahead after having a lead with naphthalene derivatives. We thought of, since bicillin is having a very huge potential for nutraceutical and immunomodulatory efficiency, it has shown that it binds to several other proteins inside the body. We thought of using both. Here up to now I have shown only CXC chemokines. We thought of taking it forward with both CXC and CC chemokines. So we have done extensive work on this, since like sort of the peer research committees research community is not accepting if you are showing with only one protein. So we decided to have a very comprehensive approach. We have again a lot of work. The one which I showed in a slide is like a 3-4 years of work. We have taken, cloned the monomer, dimers of it. Then we have taken both monomers. That means we can engineer monomers and dimers. So that is what, as I told, as a disulfide. So we can use a wild type protein. We can use specifically monomers, dimers, and then we have taken bicillin with both murine and human CCL2 proteins. What we have shown is this bicillin very strongly binds. In fact, we are also surprised to see the bicillin binds with a nanomolar affinity. It's like 270 nanomolar. It binds very strongly to the CC chemokines. So now the question is, where does it bind? How does it influence the receptor activity? So we have done again the NMR analysis, since unless you have a residue level interactions and structure, we don't know where it binds. So we have done this analysis and we arrived at a conclusion that there is, you can see now, no one will doubt that there is no binding pocket. So you have, this is the binding pocket which is present on the human and also the urine complex. So more or less the binding pockets are similar. That is why if you take a human or the urine, you are having almost similar affinities. So that means there do exist a binding pocket for this, and this binding pocket, let me tell you, this binding pocket is far different to that of what we have seen for a naphthalene derivatives. So that binding pocket is towards the C-terminal helix and something, this is towards the N-terminal. So that means we ourselves have showed there are two different binding pockets. So now, as I told, when we did with CCL2, people ask, is it specific to CCL2 or there is some different pocket in CXC chemokines also? So we have taken one of the most important chemokine, which is the interleukin 8. So this is one chemokine which is present everywhere. You talk about the immune regulation, then there are two chemokines which comes, one is CCL2, one is IL-8. These are the two prime members of CC family and CXC family. So we have cloned and we have made monomers, dimers and everything, and we have shown that there is a beautiful binding pocket which is present for this. And these are not, let me tell you, these are, none of these are any blind docking or simply molecular docking. These are, all this information is coming from experimental data like NMR spectroscopy, fluorescence spectroscopy and everything. And this is a restrained experimental docking where we know these residues are being put out upon addition of these chemokines. So we found one more binding pocket. So what essentially this does, so you can see there is a receptor binding pocket, there is a GAG binding pocket. You see these in the structure 1, the pink ones, and there is a violet color. So the violet color is essentially the bicillin binding pocket, and the red and the pink ones are GAG and receptor binding and also common to the bicillin. So what it does is, the bicillin, when you add the bicillin to the GAGs and chemokines, when the chemokine is present, so it is essentially using some of these residues and it is blocking the chemokine receptor to go and bind towards a chemokine. That is the reason why people had seen that there is no neutrophils when it is IL-8, bikelin is added to IL-8 or CCL2 chemokine. So this is the molecular mechanism that what it does is the bikelin goes and takes forms hydrogen bonds with majority of these charged residues of arginine and lysine, and as a result it competes with the same binding pocket. It's a direct competition between the binding pocket of GAG and receptor. In some cases it entirely competes with receptor, and in some cases it binds with GAG and receptor. These are again multiple pathways are there. We are looking into those multiple pathways, in which cases it only try to bind to the GAG, and also some cases only receptor or both cases. So there are, once we are doing these things, there are much more things coming in, and this is one of the classical example, and this one had given a lot of hope for us, and also we could able to now screen so many other derivatives on the chemokines, which at some point of time we can give much more molecular details how these small molecule surfaces has been evolved on chemokines surfaces. So with this, I will conclude my session. So I hope I convincingly showed that chemokines adopted species-specific evolution pattern to generate differential binding surfaces. So they do form heteromers, and we have some of these synthetic sulfated molecules which can compete with the endogenous heparin molecules, so that they can make oligomers for the chemokines, both homo and hetero oligomers. And I have shown you that small molecule surfaces are present, where we have shown there are naphthalene derivatives which can bind, and there are different binding pockets where molecules can bind and regulate the immunomodulatory activities or leukocyte trafficking of on chemokine G protein coupled receptor axis. So with this, I thank all the people. So the first 4 students are graduated recently, and 3 of them has heavily contributed for this work. So this is the group existing. So we have a NMR called, we have a NMR, but for high megahertz NMR we have a collaboration with CBMR Lucknow, and actually from University of Berlin we got these synthetic GAGs. So I thank for all the funding from DBT, SERB, MHRD, etc., and the NMR facilities at IIT Roorkee. And I thank you all for your patient listening. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Kumari. If there is any question, any participant has question, you can ask now. So, Dr. Krishna, it seems there is no question.
Okay.
I will ask quick question. Nice talk, Dr. Krishna. I have quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
So my question is that, so it's a beautiful thing that, the GPCR is difficult to crystallize, but with the NMR, you show that, your bicycline is binding to CCL2. Did you look at in the biological context, as you show that, in the computational or the NMR context that, they are not having efficacy with other isoforms, but did you look at in the biological context, does it transform from the computational to the biological studies way?
Yeah, actually the bicycline study we have taken, there are biological evidences for the bicycline.
Okay.
That is where we have started. Since I do agree with you, anything which we start in the NMR or computational side, it won't translate to the biological side. Yeah. Majority of the times, the translation efficiency is very poor. So what we have done is the bicycline is reported by the biologists that they do interfere with GPCRs, and they reduces the leukocyte migration. So that means in the presence of bicycline, the migration of leukocytes is reduced for both CXC and CC families.
Okay, got it.
What is not known is how it does.
Got it.
Yeah.
More mechanistic studies you guys are
Yes.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Is there any other question? Okay. Well, thank you, Krishna, for such a nice talk.
Okay. Thank you very much.